In our today's video, we will learn about types of pollination. We know that the transfer of pollen grains from one anther of a flower to the stigma of a flower is called pollination. After pollination, fertilization of pollen grains with the ovule takes place, which leads to the formation of seed and fruit. There are mainly two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. Let's understand self-pollination first. Self-pollination occurs when pollen from one flower pollinates the ovule of the same flower or other flowers but of the same plant. Observe here for this plant. If pollen grain from this flower falls on the stigma of the same flower, that is on itself, or if it falls on a stigma of any other flower which is there on this plant itself, it is called as self-pollination. It occurs in orchids, sunflowers, hibiscus flowers, peas, peanuts, oats, peaches, potatoes, wheat, and others. Plants that can pollinate themselves and produce new offsprings are called self-fertile. That is, they can fertilize themselves. Plants that cannot fertilize by themselves are called self-sterile. They cannot reproduce by themselves. Students, note that self-pollination is generally seen in bisexual flowers. And can you tell me why? Correct. Because for self-pollination, there should be both male and female organs on the same flower. Only then give and take of pollen grains is possible. But it is also seen in unisexual flowers with the one condition that both the flowers are present on the same plant or same tree. If there is only one reproductive organ, say anther, then flower will be able to only give pollen grain. And if there is only an ovary present, then flower can only receive pollen grain. Thus, for self-pollination, presence of both anther and ovary is must on the same flower. And so plant should be bisexual. Now the question is, what if plants cannot perform self-pollination? That is, what if they are self-sterile? In such cases, cross-pollination becomes compulsory method for them to reproduce. So let us see cross-pollination in detail now. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of one flower to the stigma of the another flower on another plant of the same species. Remember students, here there are two different flowers, two different plants, but they can be near to each other or they can be at a distance from each other. But both the plants have to be of the same species. Observe this one plant having beautiful flowers on it, isn't it? Yes. When the pollen from the anthers of this flower travel for some distance to the flowers on the other plant, say here, and stick on the stigma of this flower, it is called as cross-pollination. We can clearly see here that genes from two different flowers, in fact two different plants, are getting mixed here. And thus, new varieties of plants are formed through new combination of genes. The seeds so produced develop and germinate properly and grow into better plants. And thus, by cross-pollination, not only breeds of plants or species of plants, but variation in them also increases. So now let's quickly carry out comparative study of self-pollination and cross-pollination. The self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower but borne on the same plant. while the cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower on the different plants but of the same species or genus. Self-pollination to happen does not require any external agency for transferring the pollen grains. Thus, the plants do not depend on pollinators to transfer them. While in cross-pollination, an external agents like wind, water, or insects, etc., are always required. Thus, the plants depend on pollinators to transfer pollen grains. There is no wastage of pollen grains since here they fall on the same flower or on the other flower but on the same tree or a plant. Also here, chances of failure of pollination are also less as there is no wastage of pollen grains since in self-pollination they fall on the same flower or on the other flower but on the same plant. Also, chances of failure of pollination becomes less as there is no distance barrier here. While in cross-pollination, lot of pollen grains get wasted. Say for example, while pollens being taken away by wind or insect, say 200 pollens are being taken away. Some may fall in between and only about 80 to 90 pollens reach the other flower. And you can see here how many pollens are just wasted. In fact, pollination may also fail due to distance barrier. In self-pollination, the seeds formed are less in numbers and hence the rate of reproduction is higher. Whereas in cross-pollination, seeds formed are more in number as compared to self-pollination. The seeds formed are less in numbers and hence rate of reproduction is lower. While the seeds formed are more in number as compared to self-pollination in cross-pollination, and hence rate of reproduction is higher. New and better varieties of plants cannot be produced by self-pollination. And you know the reason this is because same genes are getting mixed. While during cross-pollination, production of new varieties of flowers, fruits and trees can be there. Self-pollination may lead to the weakening of variety or the species and thereby affecting the quality of offspring. Generally, offsprings formed after cross-pollination are more viable and thus produce better and stronger species. So students, this is all about types of pollination. In our next video, we will learn about various agents of cross-pollination.